Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is probably going to end up being a series of articles because I've had so many people ask me to deal with the silver article on FOFOA's blog spot, Costada's silver forum. So I'm going to go ahead and deal with that article line by line, and we're going to examine that together. So it's probably going to end up being a number of entries. But be that as it may, we want to examine the arguments in full and see whether we agree with them or not. So let's start off with the daily chart, and very interesting observations. First of all, our MACD, you can see that I've drawn our MACD from the 2008 lows. Now you will note that the actual low point in 2008 was in price here was not the actual low point in the MACD. So the MACD actually bottomed before the price bottomed, but eventually we got a rally from that. Maybe a similar case here, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But we did get a low on the MACD, and I've drawn a perfectly level line across to today, and you can see we've just penetrated that low. So silver is now the most oversold that it has been since sometime in 2007. So that's quite a sell-off, and that leads me to my next line. And you can see I've been drawing in the past trend line, trend channel that matches that, and we're still in the trend channel. Now this support has not been broken, so the bull market remains intact. That's all a relative thing, but just this trend remains intact. We're up here, we're about halfway in the middle of the trend channel. You can see the volatility has increased dramatically. If we pull out a little bit here to the 8-hour, you can see that the volatility within the trend channel has gotten insane. We've broken down back into the trend channel all the way nearly to the bottom of it, run all the way nearly to the top, to the bottom again, and now we're coming back at the halfway point. So as Bixwer has pointed out, the volatility in silver has increased dramatically. You can compare by the prices here. If you look over here where we were at similar prices in early March, or even back here in January and February, these moves look like micro moves, maybe some decent sized ones here, but compared to these moves that we're now seeing, it's a whole nother different level of volatility. So our trend channel is still intact, and we're coming to a critical point here. The other line I have here is the support line that's at about 31 something. That is our next level of serious support that will be tested or penetrated if this downtrend continues. How low can the MACD go? Well, of course there's no limit. For a comparable level, you can see that we hit 3 on the MACD on the high side. We've now reset to 1.2, 1.3. What that means, I don't know. The market can go where it wants, but those are the facts that we're looking at as far as the technicals. I don't have any time to deal with the coins. I have a lot of information that I've been sent regarding the coins that I've been promoting, the Wolf series and the Grizzly series. I did get a note from SGT who pointed out that it appears, if you remember, Tulving was offering the Grizzlies at $3.99 above spot, and they disappeared, and nearly at the same time we saw them pop onto APMEX at $6.99 above spot. So one might conclude from that APMEX went over and grabbed all those Grizzlies from Tulving and added $3 to the price. So don't know, can't really confirm that, but APMEX seems to have at least 10,000 of those. Maybe they bought up the whole lot, I don't know. So let's jump on over to the topic at hand, and it's a big topic. It's FOFOA's Costada's Silver Open Forum. It was published on May 7th, and it's been a source of some controversy because normally FOFOA's site is strictly a gold site and a free gold site, and I don't know how much any of you know about the story, so I'm going to just try to review it in brief. If you go to the original FOFOA intro, which came back in August 2008, which is kind of interesting timing because that was the beginning of the collapse. But the intro goes through the introduction of FOA. FOA stands for Friend of Another, and Friend of Another was a anonymous person who posted to a gold forum. It was Michael J. Casares from USA Gold. He posted a series of articles written by FOA. Actually, it was written by another FOA. I guess he's FOA. Now, this blog here, FOFOA, is someone who's brought out the archive and has started talking about it again. So it's friend of another. That's what that stands for. But the original FOA was the person who brought out the writings of another who is anonymous. And the topic of FOA's original writings, they occurred in the 90s, and you can go to FOFOA's site and find original links back to the original articles that came out in 1996, 1997, 1998. And to just summarize, they have to do with a theory that has to do with the Arab states, or specifically the OPEC states, and their accumulation, or their alleged accumulation, of gold through the LBMA. And to understand that, if you really want to understand it, you probably want to jump over to my other channel, which is Conspiracy Nation, and I have my extra normal series extra normal video that I did there called The Petrodollar Explained. And it's a conversation between Lincoln and Washington where they go through an explanation of the history of the United States and the creation of the petrodollar standard and how that works. If you really want to understand the details of it, jump on over and watch that video. I've got a link on my channel. If you go to my main channel, you can click down here where I have under About Me, I have a link to Conspiracy Nation, so you can jump over and watch that video. But just to summarize really briefly, after Nixon took the United States off the gold standard, which was the last vestige of the Bretton Woods system, the world's currencies went to a free-floating exchange system where they would only be valued in terms of each other. Now, that's the general understanding of what the full breakdown of the Bretton Woods brought. But the petrodollar explanation is that this time frame in the early 70s coincided with the time frame where the United States set about to introduce another system, another dollar-based system that would back the dollar with oil instead of gold, which it had been backed by. So that's the idea of the petrodollar, that the dollar is backed by oil instead of gold, and that the purpose of that was to cause the dollar to continue in its dominance as world reserve currency. And the basic mechanisms of that was that the United States would agree to protect the OPEC nations militarily if they would agree to only sell their oil in dollars. And that standard still exists today. The consortium of oil states, the OPEC states, those states today still on the WTI Texas crude contract or the light sweet trade out of Britain, you can only purchase those barrels of oil for dollars. So in other words, the upshot is that if you want to buy oil, if any country in the world to this day, if you want to purchase a barrel of oil, you have to buy dollars first, and then you can buy your oil. So this idea was to create what would be considered artificial demand for the dollar, but it's I think the term is seigniorage. It's the idea that the world reserve currency has a beneficial position as opposed to other nations, has an advantage in trading compared to other nations, because the United States, in this case, the nation that controls the world reserve currency, gets to benefit a number of ways. One, by having a larger number of outstanding amounts of the currency floating around in the world that it can issue, and therefore makes it wealthier in that way, but also has the power to devalue that currency through the process of inflation, and therefore create a type of tax on the nations that use it. So if we force all the nations to use our currency, and then as we devalue our currency, we're essentially taxing all the nations. So that's what my video explains, that's on Conspiracy Nation, and you might want to listen to that to try to understand the mechanisms of the petrodollar. But let's segue into FOFOA's point. Now, what the point that FOA originally brought out was that by observing a series of transactions in 1997 or so, it says here the LBMA published its daily clearing volume for the first time in January 1977. It rocked the tight-knit world of international gold traders and analysts. So what he's alleging is that essentially the members of the OPEC states, the agreement was that, I didn't cover this, but the agreement was, of course, that they would receive a large amount of dollars for the oil that would only be sold in dollars, and then they would reinvest those dollars back into financial instruments in the United States. So, of course, what could you do? If you had dollars, you're going to have to reinvest them back in the issuing country. So that created a tremendous demand for U.S. treasuries and U.S. stocks, which we know that the OPEC members had enormous positions in. Of course, in 2008, some of the sheiks took tremendous baths in those, and it's gone on through the years. But what FOA was alleging that another had brought out is that in secret, these oil states, because they did not trust the arrangement, were actually accumulating gold secretly, and that was done with the knowledge of the petrodollar controllers in the United States and the LBMA. And we can speculate all the conspiracy theories about who runs everything. That's a whole other issue. But the theory of FOA is that the United States made an agreement with the OPEC nations that they would be able to accumulate gold to protect themselves from the ultimate devaluation of the dollar, because if they're taking paper for their oil, then if the paper is reneged upon, then obviously they have nothing. So whether it was because they were deciding to back out and weren't comfortable with the arrangement, or whether it was because there could be a number of reasons of how this thing came about, whether they threatened things, or we don't know. And we only know that this is just speculation from an anonymous person. But it makes some sense that the Arabs would try to protect themselves by, or I'm sorry, not the Arabs, but OPEC nations would try to protect themselves by getting something other than fiat dollars, which the United States has sole control over and could obviously print to oblivion. So that's the theory behind FOA. Now, the article on FOFOA is Costada's Silver Open Forum, where he goes into a lot of issues that we've been dealing with silver. And I'm going to break this up because I'm going to have to examine this article line by line. But I wanted you to understand the theory of FOA and FOFOA so you could understand his approach and where he's coming from. And I will take that up in part 2, and we'll talk to you next time.